Welcome to the Screen the Screener College Basketball Podcast with your hosts, Mike Randle and Gus Kearns.
Welcome back to the Screen the Screener College Basketball Podcast, where the train keeps rolling. And today we're going to the NEC Conference to talk about Bryant basketball. We're bringing in an expert. We find them at every single school, and Bryant is one you should be paying attention to because if you saw last year, they are coming and they are coming quickly. Jake Zimmer covers all things Bryant Hoops, Patriot League TV, Big East Digital, and he's the co-host of the Beers, Business, and Balls podcast presented by House Enterprise, College Hoops, and Craft Beer Junkie, much like myself and Gus Kearns here at Screen the Screener. Follow him on Twitter, please, at Jake Zimmer12. Jake, Bryant Hoops, thrilled to have you on.
Thanks so much. What an intro, too. And I know you just took most of it from my Twitter bio, but man, nobody's gassed me up like that in a long time. Appreciate you having me on today, Mike.
Man, if I could get somebody on to talk about a college hoops team, that's the way it is. You are sacred gold here at the podcast. That's what it is. Listen, let's talk about the Bryant Bulldogs. Northeast Conference, we're in New Jersey. We know about them. They play an exciting brand of basketball. They have a great coach in Jared Grasso, and they're coming here. So, Jake, give us a little summary of last year. We can talk about Jim Boeheim if you want. That could be a whole separate podcast, and talk about COVID and how things worked out last year for the Bulldogs.
I'd lose my job if I opened my mouth about Jim Boeheim, so we'll leave it there. What a year last year for the Bulldogs. It doesn't really take an expert to know that it was an historic year for the Bryant program. You know, you can harp on the fact that in 2017, this team went 3-28, and they lost their head coach. Or I should say he declared his retirement. That was Tim O'Shea, about halfway through the year. And this was an unmotivated team that was sort of limping to the finish line. Sacred Heart comes into the facility in 2017. They're the worst three-point shooting team in the nation. And I think they shoot 80% from beyond the arc in one of the last games of the year. So that shows you really where that program was just 4 years ago, right? And now, all of a sudden, 4 years later, we've got a team that goes 15-7 overall, 10-4 in conference play. A team that went 7-2 to start the year as well. They had a big-time win over UMass. It was their second A-10 win in the last 2 years. They cruised in conference play, really, to start the year, besides that 93-91 hiccup, you can call it, at St. Francis, Brooklyn. They didn't lose in February at all. They swept Wagner, who would go on to be the number one seed in the regular season champs. So it's no secret, Mike, when this year culminated in hosting, not even being in the championship, but hosting that NEC championship, that marked some true progress for Jared Grasso, and I'm sure we'll talk about all his accomplishments at some point. But man, what an exciting time for the Bryant Bulldogs.
Yeah, and I have to thank you. My brother-in-law is up in Amherst, Massachusetts, and we'll talk, and he'll say, "Oh, Bryant, huh?" And I said, "You're going to lose." And what are you? Come on. What are you? No, you're going to lose. So there was a nice friendly wager between my brother-in-law and I, because if you're paying attention, folks, as he said, Bryant is being an issue. And Jared Grasso, Jake, has really done an amazing job. Enters his fourth season, started 10-20, then 15-17. Last year, 15-7. This team is on the precipice of getting to that NCAA tournament. He was influenced by Tim Clues. We used to live in New Rochelle, so I'm well aware of what Tim Clues was doing there with Jared at Iona. Talk about his style and the success that Coach Grasso has brought here to Bryant so far.
One of the first conversations that we had with Jared Grasso when he came to Bryant was interesting. And he said, I carry this piece of net around in my wallet to remind me of what the ultimate goal is, right? And it's easy to stand up there at an introduction press conference and say, we're going to win championships. We're going to expect to win all this stuff, right? That we certainly saw from Jared. But what I don't think really anyone in the media knew is how he'd back that up. And it started day one with recruiting. The message to his guys has long been, if you don't want to play hustle basketball, then please do not play for me, right? But you can find great success somewhere else, but it will not be here. So that was a big part of Jared's recruiting philosophy and still remains to this day. If guys are looking into, have their name in the rafters, right? Which is not necessarily a bad thing, right? You want to be honored for your legacy and your accomplishments, but if you come in and you make this program about you, then you'll be on the streets pretty quickly. Jared's philosophy here is, being the most athletic and well-conditioned guys on the court, being the most cohesive team that you can possibly be. That's a culture that he's built at Bryant, Mike. And honestly, that hasn't really been there before. Full court practices, in talking to some SIDs and media members that would go into practice in the early Grasso days, they were shocked because from Tim O'Shea to Jared Grasso, the instant revelation was, oh my God, they're doing full court practices. They're doing 60-minute scrimmages off the bat. That is not what happened, let alone in the Northeast Conference, but just at Bryant to start, right? I mean, this was a big culture shock, but the vision started at the top. It was, in order to be a championship program, we need to act like one. And that's been the message throughout the entire tenure so far for Jared Grasso at Bryant.
And before we get into the individual stats, which are impressive, because I think Coach Grasso gets the trend that I've talked about with a lot of head coaches and people who cover the teams as well, with the three-pointer and defending the three-pointer. Talk about the players you had last year that you lost that aren't going to be with the Bulldogs this year.
Yeah, to start, Mike, the big hit is the former NEC Rookie of the Year, Mike Green III. Saw greener pastures. He garnered some interest from some Big Ten schools. Minnesota was right in on him at the end of the day, but ended up finding a home at Robert Morris, playing for an old NEC foe. Andy Toole running a great program over there. The recruits that he's been able to garner have been quite interesting. So curious to see how he fits into that offense. But again, you lose one of your top offensive, contributors from last year. Normally, you'd start to say, all right, well, maybe Bryant's not in a position to win some games. But after that, you look at the way the rest of this roster is rounded out, and you start to not get worried at all. We'll talk about, who's coming back and who composes this roster in a bit. But a few other, quick hitters here. Nathaniel Stokes, who is more of a winger / forward, definitely provided some height. He's gone out west back home. Mello Eggleston, who was a transfer from Wake Forest and then Arkansas State, he only played 10 minutes in the opener. Ruptured his Achilles after that, and he's not coming back this year either. So, those are some three considerable hits for the Bryant offense. Luke Sutherland as well. He was kind of the bottom of the barrel bench depth. Saw a few minutes last year, but again, the losses besides Mike Green III, they're pretty trivial here considering what Bryant brought in.
Yeah, and you have a solid group coming back. Michael Green last year was second team all-conference. Solid player, certainly, but you have a strong nucleus coming back before we get into the new players, and that's why a lot of people are looking that Bryant could be the conference favorite here at the start of the season.
Right, exactly. And Mike, the way that Bryant's able to do this kind of hustle basketball, they need to have some guys that can shoot, that are really quick, and all that good stuff, but the only downside is Bryant lacked height. They really did. They rode with Hall Elijahs, who will be back this year. He was a captain last year. Junior college transfer, fit right in, would block almost every shot that was thrown his way, it seemed like. And, the core forward that they're bringing back, if you will probably be at least 4 of the 5 starters here. Peter Kiss, who has plenty of time in Division I basketball, Quinnipiac and Rutgers, will really be the anchor for a second straight year in this Bryant offense. Looking at guys like Charles Pride and Chris Childs as well. Pride came in as a true freshman from Syracuse, New York, a couple of years ago. Chris Childs came in as one of the best junior college three-point shooters in history. His numbers were absolutely incredible. They've translated pretty well into Division I basketball so far. So when you look at that core, and you look at what those folks were able to do last year, you really aren't too concerned that Bryant's going to be hanging with the top of them again this year.
Was there a disappointment last year with the loss in the NEC championship game to Mount St. Mary's? Real successful team, solid. They've made great strides. So you can look back on it right now and say, look, it was a great season. But was there a sour taste left in their mouth? And do you think that's a huge motivating factor as we start this year?
I think so. And if there's anything about the charismatic style that Jared Grasso has built, all 15 of those guys that were playing in that game last year, they were walked off on their own court, essentially, right? They saw Mount St. Mary's celebrate a championship and hoist the trophy at center court. You had guys in there, to give you an idea, Chris Childs and a few other folks, they were out shooting about an hour later after that game.
Wow.
They were, they had their shorts on, they had their game attire on, and they were shooting basketballs as soon as Mount St. Mary's got off that floor. So talk about a sour taste. This is a group that's hungry, right? The reality of the fact is, as well, this is also a team that ran into an excellent defensive group in Dan Engelstad's Mountaineers from Mount St. Mary's. They were all over them. I think the final score was 73-68 last year. But, Jared Grasso just went on a Barstool Sports podcast today and mentioned, hey, we couldn't make a shot that game. And he's exactly right. For a team that was putting up, you look at their December numbers. I mean, they put up 93 against New Hampshire, 138 against Rhode Island College, and then 101 against St. Francis Brooklyn. They put up 93 against UMass, an A10 team. This is a team that likes to shoot, and when they have their shooting lanes cut off by a really good defensive team, they're uncomfortable, right? So talk about a sour taste. They'll always have that in their back of the head, knowing we need to put up as many points as possible against a team like that.
Yeah, and to have that balance, to be able to score and play defense is tricky because coaches have a finite amount of things they can stress. Otherwise, it's jack of all trades, master of none. But there's some new players coming in here that should supplement, make up for some of the losses. The players, like you said, Michael Green, that I think make them they fortify the team across the board on both ends of the floor.
I'm pretty excited, Mike, about Tyler Brelsford, who's coming in from George Washington. Played some really solid minutes there last year. He's a good shooter, but he's more of a complete guard, and I think that'll complement this offense pretty nicely in a group that has quite a bit of offense, already established. Right, you can't take points away from guys like Kiss and Charles Pride and Chris Childs. It's simply not going to work. The offense is best when they're scoring, so it'll be nice to have Brelsford round out that group for sure. I think logically, he's Michael Green III's logical replacement, but again, that remains to be seen, right? Jared Grasso can wake up tomorrow and say, nope, he's not going to play at all, right? So we'll have to see. Only time tells there. And then Greg Calix, too, from George Mason. He played 19 games last year. He started one of them. He's a pretty good shooter. It takes a lot of high percentage looks. Shot around 60% last year, too. So Bryant needs all the hype they can get. I'm fully in favor of Calix, playing a major role in this offense as well. So those are two that I'm looking at. Grant Coleman as well. Made 7 starts at Milwaukee last year. He's a redshirt freshman, big guy who can let it rip from 3, and I think he should instantly see playing time in an offense like this.
And if you look at their numbers from last year at Ken Pom, obviously one of the top pace teams in the country, 6th in adjusted tempo. They can make their threes, 37.7% from three-point range, 16th best in the nation. The other thing they have to do, and I put this out from time to time, Jake, is they defend the three well. With the style of play that's in college basketball right now, the three-pointer is an integral part of what goes on. Traditional big men pounding it inside, with the exception of a couple teams, is just not the way most teams work. They have to defend the three well, and they did. Allowed 29.2% from beyond the arc for their opponents. That's 11th best in the nation. And within Northeast Conference play, they were number 1 in tempo. They were number 1 in three-point percentage made, 38.2%, and number 1 in three-point percentage defense, 27.9%. Obviously, that's a focus with Coach Grasso, but that's hard to teach.
It is, and if you ask Jared Grasso, you have to credit Phil Martelli with that. Phil Martelli Jr., who came in as an assistant coach and was promoted once Brock Erickson left over for UIC. He's now the head coach over at Nichols College in Dudley, Massachusetts. But when there was a vacancy, the only choice for Jared Grasso to take that number 2 spot was Phil Martelli Jr. And we obviously know the storied career of his father, Phil Martelli Sr., the great career he put together at St. Joe's. But you look at what Phil Martelli's been able to do. Grasso basically put him in charge and said, you are going to teach these guys how to play lockdown defense from beyond the arc. And man, has he taken that challenge. If you ask any of the guys on the actual roster, they'll tell you, Coach Martelli is an absolute wizard with the defense, with the three-point defense specifically, and he has really attributed all of it to the assistant head coach.
That is more popular than people understand. I talked to Tom Noy about Notre Dame the other day. He said under Mike Bray's years as head coach, they have never made the tournament when Anthony Solomon was not the defensive coach for the team. They brought him back this year. So to have somebody who has a skill to do that just makes everything more efficient. And we know what his father did. He is an integral part of what's going on up at Michigan with Juwan Howard. I mean, to have someone on the bench like that is critical, whether it's Tex Winter with Phil Jackson. I mean, it's a staple. So you have a pairing like that, that's going to be deadly, Jake. It really is.
Well, and you listen to what Jared Grasso says about him too, and he calls him a future head coach, which you don't see a lot of the older veteran coaches specifically call out and talk about. Jim Boeheim, he'd never say something that nice.
There it is. I waited.
It slipped out naturally. I'm glad you let it happen. But, you hear Jared Grasso say these things about Phil Martelli and say, yeah, he's a future head coach. And that goes to show you what kind of coach Jared is, which he knows his place, right? He knows that he has bigger and better things coming for him, after Bryant. And, of course, they were calling sooner than they expected, I'm sure, with all the rumors of where Jared Grasso was going to end up. Is he going to stay at Bryant? Is he going to continue to build the program, or is he going to jump somewhere else? He specifically said, this is my home. This is what I'm trying to build. But, that larger perspective, too, of, all right, somebody else underneath me that's been working for me for a couple of years, this guy's going to have a nice long career, too, and he's going to make me look really good, right? We obviously know that's, kind of how Jared's been thinking, and why wouldn't he, right? At this point, you want every single assistant coach working for you to land on their feet and grab a head coaching job at some point.
Yeah, check the ego at the door. The better the coaches around you, the better things are for you. It's about the team. It's about the team with the players. It's about the team with the coaches also. Let's take a look at the non-conference, because, of course, Bryant is looking to not only prepare for the season, they're looking to make the NCAA tournament. They want to be a live dog there, shaking people up. So, of course, it starts with the non-conference. Who do you got here for the Bulldogs this year?
Yeah, and it's making some notes before this. It's tough as usual, right? Jared Grasso's challenging his guys pretty early. They have 5 straight away games to start the year. URI, Clemson, and then they'll go down to Daytona for the Sunshine Slam, where they'll first play Bethune-Cookman and then play, depending on how the bracket ends up, either Air Force or Holy Cross. And then they'll take on Brown right down the road here in Providence as well. They've got Dartmouth at home. That's their first home game. That's been a pretty good rivalry over the years. Bryant's been overwhelmingly dominant these past few, but then Houston and Cincinnati, Mike. I mean, those are 2 programs that, look at the success they've had in recent years. Of course, Kelvin Sampson and the Houston Cougars, nothing more needs to be said about their success and how well they've done the past year.
Jake,
they ended up in the Final Four.
Jake, do you think that's tied into the Mount? Because those are 2 tough teams that are going to come and battle you defensively. Houston is great on the boards. I mean, they have found that one unique skill, just relentless. They should have lost to Rutgers. That devastated Rutgers fans here. But they just kept coming. I'm curious if that's by design, because those are 2 blue-collar schools that are going to get after you a little bit.
So I don't think, and now this is going off, what we know about Jared and what we know about the program, but I honestly don't think he was specifically searching for a matchup to challenge him defensively. I think, from what we heard, Jared Grasso put out a tweet a few months ago and said, we'll play anyone and we'll play him anywhere, right? So I don't really care who the opponent is. We'll play on the road as long as it's a guarantee game, right? So I think that's how this ended up. But again, subliminally, when they start scouting for Houston, they're of course going to say, all right, this is one of the better defensive teams this program will have ever played, and probably one of the best that Jared's played as a head coach as well. So, that'll be a big focus. And I think it'll be a nice test as well when they go up against somebody like Mount St. Mary's, who, has a great defensive group that they're basically bringing back in its entirety this year. When they play a group like Mount, they'll say, all right, we played Houston. Whether that goes well or not, we know how Houston operated, right? We know how, let's say Bryant wins 100-95, right? That's still not a great defensive game for him at that point. So you better believe that that's going to be an emphasis when Mount St. Mary's comes around.
Yep, and I can see it right now, that Houston game, 16-4, timeout Coach Sampson at the under, as we're getting to the under 16 timeout. Jake, this was great. I appreciate a few minutes. One more question, then we'll get you out of here. I have to follow Jake, folks, but give me the prediction. Give me what the Bryant fans are thinking about. This is a big year. It's year 4 for Coach Grasso. You had success last year. You almost knocked off Syracuse no matter what excuse they made. Tell me, what are Bryant fans looking for this year, and what do you expect out of the Bulldogs in the NEC?
So let's start off with non-conference play. I truly think I'm one of the many up here in Rhode Island that thinks that Bryant can beat URI game 1. Yes. I think they can absolutely go down to Rhode Island, give them a really good challenge. David Cox has been a little slow to get his team to the expected results that he's wanted so far. But, 2 wins against an A-10 school in the last 2 years. Why not make it 3? I think Bryant starts 1-0. I think they have the potential to pick off one of Clemson, Houston, or Cincinnati. I think all 3 might be a stretch, but I look at a program like Cincinnati, maybe a couple challenges, and they've been pretty slow to get going in non-conference play over the years as well.
Jake, how about Clemson? How about Clemson coming off? I mean, I know that they have trouble scoring. Bryant could get hot early on. That's not a massively intimidating home court advantage. I could see that game absolutely. Yeah.
No, I think if there is a winnable game of those, all three of those are winnable games. Let's make it clear. I think, the best shots with Clemson and Cincinnati over these first couple. But ultimately, Mike, solid mix of returning veterans, and then you've got more additions and subtractions, obviously. I think, you have to expect Bryant to be playing on championship weekend this year. I think Grasso did a nice job out in the portal, out on the recruiting trail, and the roster's really rounded out this year. I think he's addressed some key holes that he needed to fix, and we'll have to see what adjustments he makes throughout the year. But, the buzz is real in Smithfield.
Buzz is real in Smithfield. Great way to end it. Folks, Jake Zimmer, amazing job. Bryant Hoops, Patriot League TV. He's all over the place. This guy doesn't sleep. Beers, Business, and Balls podcast produced by House Enterprises. Definitely listen. Follow him on Twitter at Jake Zimmer12. I certainly do. Jake, thank you for a few minutes. We will connect this season. The train keeps rolling, but I wanted to stop at Bryant because, folks, you are going to hear about this team in 2021, 2022. Thanks so much, Jake, for a few minutes.
Mike, thanks so much.
I'm addicted to the appetite.